and recovery. My name is John Schwartz. I'm the Recovery Center Manager at the Wyndham Recovery Community Center for the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And I just want to welcome everybody and hope that you find this informative. It's a little bit of my own process and how I wound up where I am and how I've been able to use the tools that I've acquired through my experience and training working with CCAR in order to support others in recovery and in order to inform my own process in order to get a little bit of that synergy that can be taken advantage of by using tools from multiple pathways of recovery in order to support my primary one. So again, welcome everybody. So just briefly to get started, I just want to move to the first slide, which is the learning objectives for today's webinar collaborative is to understand the potential synergy of employing tools and strategies from various pathways of recovery and overcoming barriers and challenges to personal growth, to identify some challenges common to people in recovery and the tools applicable to their effective resolution, to discuss strategies for the implementation of skills and tools taken from different ancillary pathways without losing primary focus, and to increase familiarity with these tools in order to offer them in situations where they may prove useful. And the first thing I want to just talk about is why having this conversation is important. And one of the things that I found in my own journey is that I wound up in situations where I felt like I was stuck, where I felt like I was losing hope, where I was losing engagement. And one of the reasons was that I didn't really find the tools necessary to deal with some of the things that were going on in my life, mostly in my head, in order to address those things. And it was suggested to me by some friends of mine in recovery that I explore some other stuff. And I found that doing that and just the act of pursuing those things, and just the act of thinking outside of the box, was incredibly therapeutic in my process because it made me come to the realization that the pathway I was pursuing wasn't the only game in town. So that if I wasn't getting results, if I wasn't getting the kind of progress that I was hoping for, that there were other things that I could apply to my process in order to get better information, in order to sort of like get to the places I needed to get to in order to explore what was going on in my process to work through it. Because one of the things I've learned over time is there's no way around and there's no way over these things that you have to go through. And to have the maximum amount of support wherever it comes from, I found to be incredibly helpful. So moving on, for the purpose of this discussion, I'm talking about both and as opposed to either or recovery. Sometimes, I heard some people when I was at the conference, the Multiple Pathways of Recovery conference in October, I heard some people talking about the concept of silos and how we can get caught, are so enamored of our own pathway of recovery, or so lashed to the mast of our pathway of recovery that to the exclusion of other things that might be helpful to us, we're not able to take advantage of those things. So when I talk about both and recovery, I'm talking about the application of skills, tools, and strategies from pathways of recovery outside of one's primary pathway in order to more effectively address both internal and external challenges encountered in pursuit of recovery-oriented goals. So synergy, is known as 2 plus 2 is 22, and the literal definition is the interaction or cooperation of two or more agents to produce a combined effect greater than the sum of their separate effects, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Why would I not want to bring to bear whatever resources I can that are at my disposal in order to help to process, deal with, better inform my process, in order to get to the next best place, whatever that looks like. And there's some examples of synergy there. I'm sure that we can all point out some other ones. But in point of fact, I find that this whole idea of working with somebody who finds themselves in the mental place where they're feeling stuck, where they're feeling like they can't make progress. We talked about doing this, that, or the other thing, and it's not working for me. And being sort of in this circular business of one pathway of recovery can make it really, really challenging to help people stay motivated and engaged in the process. And I found, in my experience working with other people in recovery, that one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people is when they fail to stay engaged in the process of recovery. So part of what I do as a coach when I'm coaching people is to try and motivate people to stay engaged in the process, whatever that looks like to them. And my personal feelings on what a person does in terms of what their choices are and what their thought process is sort of immaterial. I'm just there to support them, to help to inform them, and then again keep the lines of communication open so that I have the opportunity to explore how that's working for them, how their plan going forward is working, and if we need to modify that in some way. So all roads lead to Rome is another way of saying whatever gets you there, gets you there. And it says, as recovery coaches, being an effective resource broker can make a huge difference in the lives of those whom we support. When recovery is feeling stuck or faced with an obstacle which is new or daunting, the ability to offer alternative perspectives and approaches can go a long way toward maintaining motivation towards overcoming them. Actively listening to those whom we serve increases our ability to offer these alternatives when applicable, provided that we have some degree of fluency with them. And a couple of the notes that I made about this was, when it comes to stuckness, then often it's like a euphemism for an emotional or a mental roadblock or a log jam. It's some intellectual construct derived from a fear or some lingering reservation about embracing the change that we articulate that we're going to make. And that's a good opportunity to use, the motivational interviewing skills or the idea of developing discrepancy and saying, hey, I thought the last time we talked that we stated we were going to this place. Now you seem reluctant. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, right? And sometimes being able to provide a different view, a change of perspective, a different approach, which is, bringing other modalities, other strategies into the conversation, can provide comfort, hope, and motivation to continue. It's like, for instance, if this plan doesn't work, at least I know it's not the only game in town. I know it's not the only alternative. There are other things that I can use to bring to bear in the situation that'll help me get out of get into a better place. The other thing is just that whole idea that there are multiple approaches available doesn't leave me with this all or nothing attitude that if I throw myself at this thing with all my might at this thing and it doesn't work for me, then I'm screwed and I'm back to square one, which is not the case, nor should it be the case, right? When I talk about fluency, obviously there are so many different modalities, so many different pathways of recovery, so many things to learn and to know. It could take a lifetime, maybe longer, who knows? I mean, thank God for guys like Bill White who help flesh a lot of this stuff out, and if I have the time to read, I can learn a tremendous amount. Plus a bunch of other resources that we can use. But it's really about having a basic working knowledge of multiple pathways of recovery and easy access in terms of being able to find and provide information and resources to people so that they can look and explore whether this is something that might be applicable to their situation, whether it's going to work for them or not. So I talk a lot about the transferable skills of addiction with the people that I coach, because I work with a lot of people whose lives are pretty much, they're burned to the ground, and they feel like they've wasted all this time in active addiction, and they're never going to be able to get this time back, and all this, they're full of shame and remorse, and they're just not seeing any hope or any light at the end of the tunnel or any of that kind of thing, and I always try and bring into the conversation the fact that, first of all, it's an incredibly courageous act that they're considering change. But second of all, that the skills that people acquire, I can certainly speak for myself, the skills that I acquired during my years, decades of active addiction were transferable skills. In other words, we're talking about the resilience, resourcefulness, flexibility, and singularity of purpose. I mean, I literally could sell ice cubes to Eskimos. I needed to do certain things on a daily basis in order to keep myself going, doing what I thought that I needed to do. And I acquired a lot of skills in terms of being able to keep my priorities straight and sort of what I needed to do, what the cover up was going to be, how I was going to get access to what I needed to do, how I was going to fund what I needed to do, how I was going to keep this illusion going that I was some sort of functional individual, be able to have the right story to tell the right people at the right time and the right place in order to get the results that I thought I wanted, and I hear people often say things like, staying in active addiction is a full-time job. If I could only put 25% of the effort toward staying clean as I did toward getting high, my life would be a dream, or that kind of a thing. And I talk to people about, the cartoon supervillain. If only he could have used his powers for good instead of evil, kind of a thing. And I think that people sell themselves really short on the skills that they've used in order to survive in the world of active addiction when it comes to like applying their resilience and their singularity of purpose and their desire to like achieve a goal to recovery or to finding a job or to getting their recovery capital all squared away. But they don't realize what skillful and talented people that they really are. And I have to say that the people I work with, by and large, are some of the most talented, resourceful, intelligent people I've ever met. And they can see through a BS story in like a hot second. So if I'm not being absolutely genuine and honest with people, they're going to know that in a minute, and our relationship isn't going to go very far. So it says helping a recovery to see the value in some of these transferable skills can be a good start to building not only a relationship built on trust, but also to ending hopelessness. It's like, look, you're bringing all of this to the table. Let's find a way to take those skills that you've acquired and apply them to this process. And you're already well into the game, and you don't even know it yet, right? Outside the box thinking is the norm. So incorporating tools from various pathways comes naturally to most. And I have to say that a lot of people that I work with in general have a healthy skepticism toward anybody who's trying to help them. Because they've been in situations before, perhaps in the active addiction world or in the treatment world where they had expectations that weren't met. So often, part of my initial conversations with people when I'm going into this process is to try and set up what their expectations are of the process, what my expectations are of the process as well, and how we can come to some kind of agreement on, we'll know this process is working when, our relationship comes to this place. Because for me, if I can't have that relationship based on trust, in other words, if a person doesn't feel safe enough talking to me about what it's going to take to get them to where they need to go, I'm going to be really limited in terms of how I'm going to be able to help them. Which is one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to be in the recovery coach lane, as opposed to a number of other lanes which will basically limit my ability to self-disclose or to talk about stuff that I need to talk about, or to give a person assurances that there's going to be very little in terms of reporting or documentation or any of that stuff involved in our process, so that they can truly feel safe and know that they're getting my best self. And I think that's really important to the process, because if my lines of communication with the people that I'm trying to support don't stay open and honest and genuine, the process isn't going to be of maximum effect to the people I'm trying to help. And I think that's super important. So let's look at some of the common challenges that people face in the recovery process. And I know that this barely scratches the surface of some of the things that come up. These are some of the greater things, some of the things that I hear more often, and some of the things that I've dealt with on myself, and I continue to deal with, honestly, on a daily basis. But enough about me. So ancillary process addiction, in other words, I used to call that playing whack-a-mole. Like, I used to play whack-a-mole with these character defects, where I get my substance use thing under control, but I have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff in order to make myself feel a little bit better, or put all of my weight and all of my issues and all of my problems onto somebody who I was involved with in a relationship. Sorry, Eileen, that would be my wife. Gambling addiction, sex addiction, eating disorders, all these other things that pop up as another way to sort of fill the same void. I've heard addiction described as a constant state of lack, or a God-shaped hole, or whatever it is, and that's searching all of our lives. I certainly spent a lot of time in my own life searching for something to fill that sense of emptiness, that sense of lack, that I wasn't getting somewhere else. And I filled it with a variety of things. And, as I go further down the road, I realized that I was trying to fill that void in ways that had nothing to do with substance use way before I was ever exposed to any substances. It was validation from other people. It was, the need to be involved with things to an extent, to say yes to everything and take too much on and get resentments as a result. All of that stuff, anxiety, chatter, negative inner dialogue. Health issues as a result of substance use, or just a result of poor lifestyle choices. Boredom, lack of purpose, lack of motivation and engagement. Urges, cravings, triggers, executive function issues. I've done a significant amount of research on the effect of long-term substance use, particularly opioid use, on the executive function of the brain. And somehow, we lose our ability to have that half a second of space in between impulse and reaction, where we're just on a knee-jerk basis, like engaging in behaviors that are contrary to our stated goals. And sometimes it's necessary to create an almost outside mechanical function in order to go through the process of thinking it through. This has just happened. What are my thoughts about this thing? How am I making this an irrational thought process? What is a better substitute for this thought that I'm having now? And how do I deal with it? And there are several different things which we'll talk about in a minute that could be used as tools, strategies in order to replace what would be our sort of natural executive function thing until we get to some point where we're able to reestablish that on an internal basis, right? The whole concept of guilt and shame, you know, um, stigma related to medication-supported recovery, medication-assisted treatment, which is significant. Access to creativity without fear of relapse or self-consciousness. Now, I work with any number of people who are very afraid of re-engaging with their creative nature because their creative nature became intertwined with their use of substances. And as a result, you know, uh, they cut themselves off from things that were not only therapeutic but were very important and was a very big part of their identity of what made them feel valuable and important. And then gender identity, LGBTQ issues. And again, these are just a few, like the scratching the surface of the number of things that could come up with people that can get them to feel like their needs aren't being met or they're stuck in recovery. Now I came up in the 12-step world, and I'm a 12-step person and all of that stuff, and I have a sponsor and I have sponsees and all that other business. But in point of fact, there are certain items in certain areas where my sponsor doesn't want to go into with me. There are certain places where he feels uncomfortable and certain places where he doesn't have a level of knowledge or expertise, wherever it is. And I found it incredibly helpful to look outside of that relationship and outside of that pathway in order to get what I needed in terms of like getting the information and getting the sort of courage to go forward and the motivation, whatnot, to get to the next best place. And I've found it to be incredibly helpful when I am working with people who are in a similar situation to offer them alternative ways of thinking about stuff so that they can get to a place where they feel hopeful again. Because the loss of hope and the loss of motivation, are serious issues when it comes to helping people stay engaged in the process of recovery. So here are a few things that I've become familiar with and that I've actually implemented in my own process and in helping others to help them see their way around or through situations that they're dealing with. There are certain things, not that I'm a clinician, but there are certain things when I start to get to a place with somebody who I'm working with and I start to touch on some kind of like trauma from early childhood or something that really triggers an individual where I think that like getting into the clinical environment can be really helpful for somebody, and I will offer that up as a possibility. I was like, have you considered doing this? And I know that in my own process, when I was dealing with some stuff, especially as it related to like, early childhood, 0 to 7, 0 to 15 stuff that was really impacting. I was seeing the whole world through a prism, that was not necessarily rational or based in reality. That I really needed some help dealing with that and sort of like trying to process that and just coming to terms with it. One of the other things that I didn't mention that I think about is that this whole business is very nonlinear. I started to approach recovery like it was a checklist and be like, well, so I've addressed this issue and therefore I can put it in a box and I'm never going to have to look at that again. Well, guess what? I don't know about anybody else's world, but in my world, it turns out that if I get to the place where I'm feeling vulnerable, or something, triggers some of my stuff, especially the childhood stuff, I can go right back into that lizard core place of fear, and all of my decisions and all of my, the things that I'm currently involved in, I will be in a place where, how did I get back to this area, where I thought that I had dealt with this? And it turns out that, it's a daily practice. I do the best I can kind of a thing with what I've got, and I try now and be mindful of and to recognize when that stuff is starting to impact on my process. I deal with what I deal with, but I never want the stuff that I deal with to impact my ability to be of service or to be of support to somebody else. And that's very important to me because, look, I'm a human being. There are days when I'm just not feeling it for one reason or another, and it's important for me to put that stuff aside to be of service. And that's why, like in the last month's webinar, Rebecca was talking about compassion fatigue and self care and all that stuff, and it's very important. And we all find our way through to doing what we need to do in order to bring our best selves. And I know that it's something that I try and practice on a daily basis because I got into doing this, as a career path because it was important for me to be able to try and be of support to other people. And if I can't bring my best self, well, then I'm not getting to my stated goal. So I can practice a little developing discrepancy on myself in that situation, right? So we're talking about smart recovery, which is based on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and some of the tools involved there. And I find the tools of smart recovery to be incredibly helpful because they're not only are they another way of looking at stuff and a secular way of looking at stuff. If you have somebody who's challenged with the whole God thing, it can be really useful. And there are also a lot of useful visual tools involved with smart that can be really helpful for people who are visual learners. Um, Meditation, yoga, breathing exercises. Again, just being able to slow down that hamster wheel in the head can be really, really helpful. I know sometimes I get going a mile a minute and I can start projecting out and get to a place that I never intended to get to. And sometimes all I really need to do is be aware of the fact that I need to step back. Spiritual direction, contemplative prayer. I mean, I took on the services of I asked someone to be my spiritual advisor because I felt that a lot of the decisions I was making and a lot of things that I was doing in my life was based on fear, and I considered fear to be a lack of trust and a lack of faith, and that I knew that if I made a sincere effort to deepen my connection in a spiritual way, that it would help me be a little bit more comfortable in my own skin and capable of going to places that frightened me. Physical activity and exercise, again, not only the production of endorphins, but getting out into nature, move a muscle, change a thought, all of that business can be really, really helpful to people. And I know that, I have, uh, in the nicer weather, I'm really for slacking off this time of year, but in the nicer weather, I like to get outside. I like to do some stuff. I have some friends who have offered me the use of kayaks, which is a great thing just to get out early in the morning and just be in nature and be quiet. And it's very helpful to my process and really connect with what's important for me and what I want going forward, and how to put some of those those dragons to rest so that I can go forward in a healthy and meaningful way. Healthy cooking and eating. Especially, this is really good. What I put into my body often determines my mood. If I get jacked up on sugar or caffeine, sometimes I'm not making the best decisions, and I'm wondering why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, like being either like overly energetic or overly tired. And of course, I wasn't exactly kind to my body. Saint Francis referred to his body as brother ass. And when they asked him at the end of his life if there was anything that he regretted, he said, "I wish I had been kinder to brother ass." And I certainly fall into that category myself because Lord knows, when I was out doing what I was doing, I certainly wasn't looking to like eat healthy or like get enough rest or any of that stuff. The beast was driving the train and I was busy meeting the needs of the beast, that everything else fell by the wayside. Plus when you have really low self-esteem, the whole idea of taking care of yourself in any way, seeing a doctor or a dentist or having your cholesterol checked or any of that stuff that I sort of take for granted now, I had absolutely no interest in or investment in. Leisure activities and hobbies, they talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous about, winding up being the hole in the donut. Like what's going to happen to me? Like I'm turning my will and my life over. I'm getting involved in this recovery process. I'm deferring to the best thinking of another, all those other things. So what's left of me? What's my identity? What am I going to do? And is it all going to be this gloom and doom, like working on recovery and all this other stuff? Well, no, it's not like that at all. And, fortunately, I had great role models in recovery who were like, let's go out, fishing. Let's go to this place. Let's do this. Let's go to this concert. Let's go to this conference. Let's do these things. And let's get involved in tying flies, something I never thought I'd get involved in. And I have this little lamp at home, and I do all this thing. I got involved in painting miniatures to do miniature wargaming and building terrain and all these other things, which worked out to be almost like a meditation for me because it made the rest of the world go away. And all of those things that I was wasting time and money and health and resources and relationships on to make the world go away, it turns out like I didn't need to be doing that. So it's super important to like find other things in areas of your life that can give you that same kind of peace of mind and like meaning and purpose and validation, you know, that maybe you can't get in other ways, or maybe you forgot how to get in other ways. Yes, Bridget, sleep patterns are very important. And you know, I worked for 30 years in the food service industry, and I changed shifts more times than I could shake a stick at, you know, and that whole business of having my sleep patterns disrupted were always really, really difficult. I used to spend my days off pretty much in a state where I was either like asleep in hibernation for the whole day, or where I was like restless and agitated because I was overtired and I couldn't sleep. And sometimes, you know, again, my best decision making, even like on a full night's sleep, is not always terrific. So if I'm compromised in some way, whether it's like, you know, lack of sleep or lack of food or lack of connection with other people in recovery or wherever it is, you know, sometimes I can make some really poor choices, and then I have to deal with the aftermath of that. And I can't speak for anybody else, but I know I can't stand when I make a bad choice or I come off in a way that's like doesn't meet my expectations when I'm dealing with other people and I have that hanging over me. And I need to address that immediately. So I'm much better off just like thinking about in advance how I'm going to act and how I'm going to react and how I'm going to engage with people so I don't wind up in a situation where I'm left to make amends. I'm left to have the the mental merry-go-round going on, saying I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and you could have done this better, and what have you learned in all this time? You know, the committee in my head starts, you know, blaming and shaming me, and then I'm stuck. You know, then I'm stuck. Um, Connection with the recovery community. I mean, arguably the single most important aspect of my own recovery is that, you know, I talk to other people who are like minded and who understand me. They understand the way I'm wired and the fact that I will not hesitate a second in picking up the club and beating the crap out of myself, but I'll put off all day making the phone call to get some relief. You know, and people just shake their head and be like, brother, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's ridiculous. Let's get past this together. You know, and I find the safety in numbers part of recovery to be incredibly comforting to me. So every individual learns in a different way, and actively listening and asking the right questions will help us to supply the information and encouragement we needed in the way most effective to each person. I talked a little bit earlier about visual learners and the whole idea of smart recovery. You know, I don't know who is or isn't familiar with the tools of smart recovery, but there are some very, very useful tools in there for people who are visual learners, whether it's the cost benefit analysis or the lifestyle balance chart or the urge trigger craving log or whatever it is. And there's some other really excellent work that's been done that provides visual learning tools. One of them is Dr. David Best did some work with this stuff called link node mapping. And I don't know if you're familiar with that stuff, but it's a series of over 100 maps that people can use in order to articulate sort of where they are, where they want to go, how to get there when you're approaching a goal planning stuff, you know, who I can count on for support. I'll know this plan is working when, and all this other stuff. And it can be really, really helpful to people who are either stuck in sort of circular patterns of thought when they're always getting back to the, yeah, but I know if I try this, it's not going to work. Yeah, but on the other hand, this or that, the other thing. So as a result, they wind up getting sort of stuck in their own process and they're not able to move forward because they can't see the way forward. And sometimes using a visual tool, which is just a simple chart or a grid or someplace where it gives an opportunity for someone to put down in writing their thoughts, you know, can help you to help them find their own way forward. And I just think it's super important to honor the process of really getting to know the people that we work with in order to find out what motivates them to go forward and how they best are able to absorb the information to help them to make good decisions. Um, so visual tools can help break the cycle of circular argument or thinking. And when introducing new tools or pathways of recovery, it's very, very important that the person feels safe. Not that I'm saying, I'm not dismissing you and abandoning you to this other thing. Why don't you go to Celebrate? You know, in other words, I'm making the person feel comfortable with the idea, the concept first. You know, getting them to explore the possibility if they express an interest, either connecting them with someone who I know who's actively involved in that pathway or using that tool, or going into that process with them myself, like accompanying them to a meeting or to an appointment or to a webinar or to an online forum or wherever it is, just so that they know that I'm still walking alongside them on their journey and I'm going to support them as best I can, just that I'm not necessarily the best source of information, right, when it comes to that stuff. I just think that, again, my main goal in working with anybody is that they feel safe in our relationship and that they know that I'm going to be supportive of them, that I'm responsible to their recovery, not for it, as my friend Art Woodard likes to say, and that people know that I am reliable, that I can be counted on, in order to support them, in order to provide them with the information they need to make good choices, that I'm available in the case that their plan, their working operandi, whatever, is not as effective as they'd like to see, and they're looking to modify that plan. To always keep those lines of communication open and to be welcoming to the extent that if a person needs to make a change, that I'm not going to blame them or shame them about them making poor choices, but I'm going to help them to see sort of where things went awry and to try and modify the plan, hopefully bringing to bear some of the information that I've been able to collect by doing the research, by being curious. Oh, thanks so much for that link to SMART. I think it's also on the last slide here, but I am also a SMART facilitator, and I think that again, I've used some of the tools of SMART recovery in my own process. I've certainly used it with other people, and I find it particularly useful for people who, for whatever reason, are not getting traction in whatever their initial pathway. Because a lot of times in the treatment industry environment, people are presented with the 12 steps as a viable pathway, if not the only viable pathway of recovery, and that people feel, when people come away with the feeling that they're not getting traction in that modality, or that it's not working for them for whatever reason, or they get involved in the contempt prior to investigation part of it, or whatever it is, it's immaterial for me why it is that a person isn't getting traction in one pathway of recovery or another. It's up to me to say, okay, where do we go from here? Have you looked at this? Have you considered this? Have you thought of this as being a viable pathway? Because just because somebody is telling you, that this is the most well-known, sort of most effective pathway of recovery, which may or may not be true, it doesn't mean that because you don't get traction in this one thing that it's a death sentence and that you're never going to amount to anything and that you're never going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And I think that concept of knowing that there are multiple pathways of recovery and not to feel like somehow it's your fault that this isn't working for you is critically important in a lot of people's process. I mean, at that statement, the beginning of chapter 5 from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, at the beginning of like countless 12-step meetings, they're saying, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And of course, the extrapolation of that would be, so if you're failing at this, clearly you have not followed the path thoroughly enough. So therefore, it's your fault, right? Which is anything but true, And I can't tell you how many people I talk to, either in the center or on telephone recovery support calls, who, having relapse, have got the club out and they're considering it a moral failing, a personal weakness. It's like, no, you have a chronic relapsing condition that's trying to kill you. And to take it upon yourself, to make yourself responsible, self-appointed captain of the lifeboat in this situation, is not going to get you where you want to go. Let me suggest this. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about some of my own experience and how I bounced in and out forever, because I had a perfect intellectual understanding of what I needed to do, but I didn't have the necessary faith, trust, or courage in order to get to the next place. And it took a lot of very patient and generous people in order to inform my process before I could get to that place. And so I would never discount a person's feeling of being stuck or being ashamed or being lost, because I was that guy for a long time. So to talk a little about my own history and how I got involved in doing some of this work, so when I first came into recovery, and this was in 1986, this is the first time in recovery, I have to say that, my journey has not been continuous, that abstinence revealed underlying traumas which manifested themselves in ancillary process addictions, patterns of irrational thoughts and behavior, extreme bouts of paralyzing anxiety and self-doubt. This period of emotional turmoil served to prolong my separation, not only from the community best suited to inform my journey, but from the creative part of my nature, arguably the best part of myself and the part of myself that I consider to be of greatest value. Um, so to make a long story short, and I don't want to dwell on my own history too long, but in point of fact, I grew up in a household that was very, very dysfunctional. I come from a long time honored family history of self medication. I could arguably say that three of my four grandparents were alcoholic. Both of my parents were certainly heavily involved. My mother was in and out of the 12-step process for 24 years, died 2.5 years sober. I was her primary caretaker from the age of like 10 to 15. I was the one who was like hiding all the sets of car keys and throwing all the vodka down the drain and answering the phone and lying for her, and vacillating between extreme concern and blaming myself for the situation, and being really, really angry and wanting to hurt her in a lot of ways. I also sustained a significant trauma, physical trauma. I was bit by a dog in the eye when I was 6 years old, which separated me from my entire social group and left me with the possibility of being blind. And I discount that because I think I kind of put it in a box a long time ago. And as I go through the process, as time goes on, I realize that a lot of my fear and a lot of my insecurity comes from that place. And that there were a lot of things in my life that made imprints on my psychological makeup that led me to seek validation from the outside, to never feel comfortable in my own skin, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when was the bad thing going to happen next? And so I was in a place where, I really didn't know how to deal with these feelings, and I really didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. So for me, I was like an accident waiting to happen. When it comes to substance use, I mean, when that thing that makes me bodily different from my friends occurred, when I first put that substance into my body, and suddenly I felt like I was comfortable in my own skin. Hallelujah, past the mustard. You know what I mean? Like, that for me was like a watershed moment in my life. I made a commitment at that point that I was going to do that as often as I possibly could, sick or well, happy or sad, whatever it was, because that was the first time I ever felt like I could live comfortably on this planet. And I was like lashed to the mast of that for a very, very long time. So some of the things that I try to do in order to get out of this, here it is. There you go. And if this isn't a stark example of how someone's life can go dangerously off the rails, I don't really know what it was. You know what I mean? This photograph was taken by one of my best friends from high school who is no longer living. The physical toll of his substance use and poor lifestyle choices took him out at age 52, and he was a great friend and supporter of mine, and an absolute genius in a creative and artistic way. This photograph was taken in an abandoned shipyard in Oyster Bay on Long Island, right around 1980. Um, so there you go. Wish I had half of that hair back. So what I want to talk about is, I don't know, did I miss a slide somewhere? I guess I didn't. But some of the things that I brought to bear on this situation of mine were that I did seek outside help. I saw a clinician for a while. Unfortunately, being a self-centered and dishonest person, when I engaged that process, I fed all the data necessary to this individual in order to get the green light to go and drink socially again. So, I had about 4 years, in recovery. I failed to make the connection that all the best things in my life that had happened up to that point were occurring during this brief period of, being involved in the recovery process and being absent from substance use and all of other stuff. And I was given well, good job, John. You've addressed your mommy and daddy stuff, and I don't see any problem with your going forward and having the occasional cocktail. And I kind of felt like the guy on the drag strip, like watching the lights change color, red, red, yellow, yellow, yellow. When that green light went, boy, I was like, pedal to the metal. And before I knew it, I found myself at least as bad off as I ever was before. And, off of those 4 years of recovery, I did 19 years of graduate work. And by the time I got back in, by the time when, the fear of change became less than fear of staying the same, my life was burned to the ground, and I was desperately close to, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual collapse. Um, in recovery this time around, I'm just reading this. I'm sorry for a second. Yes, Bill, I agree. I agree that thoroughness is important, but I think that it's also important to make sure that we're not involved in the whole shaming business, because it's a number of people don't get traction their first time around, and a number of people don't have the information that they need when they're getting involved in that process in order to really give it the best try. Again, I was very, very fortunate in that I fell into a group of individuals, not that there are any coincidences, but who were very, very painstaking and patient in their ability to um, describe the process to me and inform me on what my responsibilities were and where I could go to seek information if I felt like I wasn't getting what I needed. And I also had a sponsor who was big-minded enough and knew his own limitations enough to suggest that I embrace some other things in order to get to where I needed to go. So aside from that, this time when I got back into recovery this time, I realized that if I was really going to make an honest go at this whole business of turning things over, in other words, realizing that there were things that were in my life that were beyond my control, that the world was going to throw things at me that I could not change or control, and then the flip side of that is being okay with that stuff, that I was going to need to deepen my spiritual connection, that my spiritual foundation was going to need to be stronger going forward. Right? So I was lucky enough to very early in the process start going on recovery related retreats with my sponsor and a bunch of guys from my home group, my home network. And I met this gentleman who was a person in recovery who was on staff at this retreat house. And he and I formed a relationship where we would meet on an individual basis, one-on-one, once a month. And we would talk about ways that I could come to a better understanding, a better relationship with, the power, whatever you want to call it, the force of the universe, the power greater than ourselves, God, good orderly direction, whatever it is you want to call it, in order to help me feel a little bit stronger, in order to give me the degree of trust and courage that I needed in order to really genuinely let go of stuff and not give lip service to the concept of letting go of stuff and turning it over, but to hang on to it anyway. And I have to say that still I'm in a situation where I have a very sort of erratic ability to maintain that connection, right? So I will often have a tug of war when it comes to my will and trying to manage stuff that's really beyond my control and trying to throw myself up against situations that I really shouldn't get involved in at all. But I do the best I can on a daily basis, and having that information, getting involved in that process with that gentleman was very, very helpful to me. And coming to a greater expectation, of a greater understanding of what God's expectations were of me and what my expectations were of him. And that it really is, like so many other things having to do with recovery, a collaborative effort, and it's all about perspective. Having quiet time, again, those retreats are really important. I carve out a certain amount of time on a daily basis in the morning to try and put myself in the best position to be of service to other people, and also not to let some of my own sort of idiosyncrasies get involved in the process when it comes to my interactions with other people. And again, I do this with a varying degree of success. Daily meditations, positive affirmations. There are several of those meditation books that I read on a daily basis in the morning. Actually, at the center that I work at, we're working on compiling a group of affirmations and meditations from the people at the center, which is fascinating to me because everyone is motivated in a different way, and some of the stuff that I'm seeing is absolutely great. I look so forward to we're going to try and self-publish this book, and I'd be happy to share it with anybody who'd like to when I finally get to the place where we have enough material to do that. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I find that to be very helpful in order to center myself so that I can be in a good place. I've recently initiated a practice of walking meditation. I've had a number of people suggest to me the idea of meditation, of quiet time, of quieting the mind, of mindfulness and all that stuff. And what I found through my attempts is that it's really, really difficult for me to sit still and be able to meditate on anything without the dialogue kicking in and having to constantly dismiss it and whatnot. So what I found was, having done some research, that there's this practice of walking meditation where I am actively engaged in concentrating on not only my breath, but the movement and the reaction of the process of walking. What does it feel like to lift my foot off the ground when my heel leaves the ground, to feel the pressure on the ball of my foot, to lifting the foot in the air, to extending the foot forward, to putting it down on the ground, impacting the earth and all that stuff. And it helps me to keep the chatter to an absolute minimum. So I'm able to clear my mind, which is what I'm looking to do. So again, going back to the all roads lead to Rome slide, what gets us there gets us there. And sometimes it's a question of like cooking pasta, just throwing it up against the wall until you find what sticks for you. And as a coach, it's incumbent upon me to have options available to someone to present them with, hey, that wasn't working. Cool. What about this? Have you thought about this? Would you like to look at this? Have you considered this? It sounds like from what you're saying to me, this might be helpful to you. Are you interested in looking at it? No shame, no blame, no judgment, no objectification, no pointing someone into a direction with like body English or like, presenting myself as a role model or any of that. I'm just offering alternatives. And if someone's interested in embracing one of those things, it's great because it's an opportunity for me to support them and learn a little bit more about something else that might help somebody else down the road. It's a win-win all the way, right? Service to others, I'm involved in doing a lot of service work through my pathway of recovery, through the local community where I work, through the local community where I live, in order to try and get out of self. Because being a self-centered, selfish individual, I found that service to others and being other-centered is not only makes me feel a little bit better about who I am and where I am, but it gets me outside of my own head. So it's the perfect medication for somebody like me. So it works out great for me. I like to write, I like to journal, I like to write music, I like to write poetry, and I find it very cathartic. I run a journaling group at the center, and we have some of the most amazing conversations based on a 5-minute writing prompt. And, I find it to be incredibly therapeutic for me to help to articulate some of the thoughts that I've had and get them on paper, and it makes them real to me. I find that if I write something down in terms of a goal or an aspiration, that I bear it in mind and I tend to try and go forward with it. And then music. Music to me is my absolute joy. Music and cooking pretty much are my absolute joys in life. And I find that being engaged in that is incredibly therapeutic. And again, it acts sort of as a meditation for me. And those are just some of the things that I've used. And, I use the tools of Smart Recovery in order to quit smoking cigarettes. I smoked cigarettes for over 30 years. I also use them to help combat some other ancillary addictions, whether it was spending money or like a sex addiction or whatever it was. I found that some of those things were very, very helpful to me in my own process. And what I'm basically saying is like, I don't want my love for and my respect for the pathway of recovery that saved my life to limit me from taking advantage of other things that can be very, very helpful to me in my own process. And likewise in the process of other people. I don't want that gift to become a limitation. If there are other things that I can take advantage of to help me or help somebody else get to the place that they state that they want to get to, why would I limit that just because of my sort of love for one particular pathway? Enough of that ugly guy. So just in summation, and I see we're getting to 10 of, having the capacity to identify areas of a recovery's process which would benefit from the application of elements drawn from pathways other than their primary one can often result in greater self-efficacy, sense of purpose, and confidence in the recovery process. In other words, like again, this is not a one-shot thing. This is not a one-trick pony. If something doesn't work for you, we can reroute. We can find another way to get to what your goal is. Don't worry. The need for greater individualization in the continuum of care related to substance use disorder is becoming apparent. And I think if you look at the efficacy and the success that our emergency department coaches are having and in other programs around the country proves that recovery is an intensely individual process. So the more that we can bring to bear in terms of sort of offering alternatives and other pathways and other tools that can come to our disposal can be really helpful. And recovery coaches, based on our genuine connections with those that we serve, are perfectly situated to facilitate this paradigm shift in our approach to the utilization of resources in order to support the individual's quest for a life built upon meaning and purpose. Again, at the end of the day, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. of what works for me or what I think is going to work for somebody else, right? It has to do with my capacity for and my ability to bring things to the table which are going to be useful to somebody else in their process. How do I do this? I do this by listening to people and finding out what they really want from life and how they intend to get there, and by offering them alternatives, strategies, and support in order to help them get to that place. It can be really, really helpful to people to know that I am completely in their corner regardless of what they think or what they feel is the right thing to do. I can certainly bring my experience to bear on what has or hasn't worked for me or the information that I've received as a result of working with a bunch of other people, but ultimately it's their journey, that they're driving that particular process, and it's up to me to be supportive and helpful and as informative as possible. So these are just some of the resources that I've compiled. I know that there are a bunch of other ones that are available. These are some of the things that I've found useful. So you have, a bunch of links to various and sundry pathways of recovery and places where you can find information about some of these things if you're not familiar with some of them. Again, I like to have a basic working knowledge of all these things. I maintain a drawer in a filing cabinet that I use for resources for my volunteer recovery coaches at the center that has basic information on any number of pathways, including these, any number of copies of some of the visual aids and whatnot that people can use in order to help the people that they're working with, in order just to help recoveries in the center to deal with what they're going to deal with. The bottom one on that, Heart Wisdom, is the Jack Kornfield podcast. I find it really helpful in my own journey in terms of trying to quiet the mind and whatnot. And I'm sure that there are hundreds of other ones. And I would hope that if we all keep in contact with each other via email or whatever modality we use, that we can help to inform each other's process and to build a greater subset of resources that we can use to help to support other people in recovery. I'm just reading some of the stuff here, and again, so some very, very useful stuff here that's in the chat box. And I just want to thank everybody for getting involved and being involved in this podcast. I hope that you found some useful information to it. I hope that it gave you a slightly different perspective on some of the things that have been effective for me in working with other people and things that have been helpful to me in my own process. If there's ever anything I can do to support anyone else, to help inform them or to talk to them about some of the things we've discussed here, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email address is johnjohn@ccar.us. I'd be more than willing to, and I'd be happy to engage with anybody who'd like any more information or would like to share any thoughts they've had about this. This is the first one of these webinars I've conducted, and I hope that you found it useful and helpful, and any feedback would be more than welcome. So again, thank you very much, and I wish you all a very pleasant Wednesday.